Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior. Short story, White Tigers. When we Chinese girls listen to the adults talk story, we learn that we failed if we grew up to be but wives or slaves. We could be heroines, swordswomen. Even if she had to rage across all China, a swordswoman got even with anybody who hurt her family. Perhaps women were once so dangerous that they had to have their feet bound. It was a woman who invented white crane boxing only 200 years ago. She was already an expert pole fighter, daughter of a teacher trained at the Shaolin Temple, where there lived an order of fighting monks. She was combing her hair one morning when a white crane alighted outside her window. She teased it with her pole, which pushed aside with a soft brush of its wing. Amazed, she dashed outside and tried to knock the crane off its perch. It snapped her pole in two. And recognizing the presence of a great power, she asked the spirit of the white crane if it would teach her to fight. It answered with a cry that white crane boxers imitate today. Later, the bird returned as an old man, and he guided her boxing for many years. Thus, she gave the world a new martial art. This was one of the tamer, more modern stories, mere introduction. My mother told others that followed swordswomen through woods and palaces for years. Night after night, my mother would talk story until we fell asleep. I couldn't tell where the stories left off, and the dreams began. Her voice, the voice of the heroines in my sleep. And on Sundays, from noon to midnight, we went to the movies at the Confucius Church. We saw swordswomen jump over houses from a standstill. They didn't even need a running start. At last I saw that I too had been in the presence of great power. My mother talking story. After I grew up, I heard the chant of Fa Mulan, the girl who took her father's place in battle. Instantly I remembered that as a child I had followed my mother about the house, the two of us singing about how Fa Mulan fought gloriously and returned alive from war to settle in the village. I had forgotten this chant that was once mine, given me by my mother, who may not have known its power to remind. She said I would grow up a wife and a slave, but she taught me the song of the warrior woman, Fa Mulan. I would have to grow up a warrior woman. I led my army northward, rarely having to sidetrack. The emperor himself sent the enemies I was hunting chasing after me. Sometimes they attacked us on 2 sides or 3 sides. Sometimes they ambushed me when I rode ahead. I would always win, Guan, the god of war and literature, riding before me. I would be told of in fairy tales myself. I overheard some soldiers, and now there were many who had not met me, say that whenever we had been in danger of losing, I made a throwing gesture, and the opposing army would fall, hurled across the battlefield. Hailstones as big as heads would shoot out of the sky, and the lightning would stab like swords, but never at those on my side. On his side, they said. I never told them the truth. Chinese executed women who disguised themselves as soldiers or students, no matter how bravely they fought or how high they scored on their examinations. One spring morning I was at work in my tent repairing equipment, patching my clothes and studying maps when a voice said, "General, may I visit you in your tent, please?" As if it were my own home, I didn't allow strangers in my tent, and since I had no family with me, no one ever visited inside. Riverbanks, hillsides, and cool sloped rooms under the pine trees. China provides her soldiers with meeting places enough. I opened the tent flap, and there in the sunlight stood my own husband with arms full of wildflowers for me. "You are beautiful," he said, and meant it truly. "I have looked for you everywhere. I've been looking for you since the day that bird flew away with you. We were so pleased with each other, the childhood friend found at last, the childhood friend mysteriously grown up. I followed you, but you skimmed over the rocks until I lost you." "I've looked for you too," I said, the tent now snug around us like a secret house when we were kids. "Whenever I heard about a good fighter, I went to see if it were you," I said. "I saw you marry me. I'm so glad you married me." He wept when he took off my shirt and saw the scar words on my back. He loosened my hair and covered the words with it. I turned around and touched his face, loving the familiar first. So for a time, I had a partner, my husband and I, soldiers together, just as when we were little soldiers playing in the village. We rode side by side into battle, and when I became pregnant during the last 4 months, I wore my armor altered so that I looked like a powerful big man. As a fat man, I walked with foot soldiers so as not to jounce the gestation. Now, when I was naked, I was a strange human being indeed. Words carved on my back, and the baby large in front. I hid from battle only once, when I gave birth to our baby. In the dark and silver dreams I had seen him falling from the sky, each night closer to the earth, his soul a star. Just before labor began, the last star rays sank into my belly. My husband would talk to me and not go, though I said for him to return to the battlefield. He caught the baby, a boy, and put it on my breast. "What are you going to do with this?" he asked, holding up the piece of umbilical cord that had been closest to the baby. "Let's tie it to the flagpole until it dries," I said. We had both seen the boxes in which our parents kept the dried cords of all their children. "This one was yours, and this yours," my mother would say to us brothers and sisters, and fill us with awe that she could remember. We made a sling for the baby inside my big armor and rode back into the thickest part of the fighting. The umbilical cord flew with the red flag, and it made us laugh. At night, instead of our own tent, I let the baby ride on my back. The sling was made of red satin and purple silk. The 4 paisley straps that tied across my breasts and around my waist ended in the housewife's pockets lined with a coin, a seed, a nut, and a juniper leaf. And at the back of the sling I had sewn a tiny quilted triangle, red at its center against 2 shades of green. It marked the baby's nape for luck. I walked, bowed, and the baby warmed itself against me, his breathing in rhythm with mine, his heart beating like my heart. When the baby was a month old, we gave him a name and shaved his head. And for the full month ceremony, my husband had found 2 eggs, which we dyed red by boiling them with a flag. I peeled one and rolled it over the baby's head, his eyes, his lips, off his bump of a nose, his cheeks, his dear bald head, and fontanelle. I had brought dried grapefruit peel in my saddlebag, and we also boiled that. We washed our heads and hands in the grapefruit water, dabbing it on the baby's forehead and hands. Then I gave my husband the baby and told him to take it to his family, and I gave him all the money we had taken on raids to take to my family. "Go now," I said, "before he is old enough to recognize me. And while the blur is still in his eyes and the little fists shut tight like buds, I'll send my baby away from me." I altered my clothes and became again the slim young man. Only now I would get so lonely with the tent so empty that I slept outside. I stood on the top of the last hill before Peiping and saw the roads below me flow like living rivers. Between roads, the woods and plains moved too. The land was peopled, the Han people, the people of 100 surnames, marching with one heart, our tatters flying. The depth and width of joy were exactly known to me, the Chinese population. After much hardship, a few of our millions had arrived together at the capital. We faced our emperor personally. We beheaded him, cleaned out the palace, and inaugurated the peasant who would begin the new order. In his rags he sat on the throne facing south, and we, a great red crowd, bowed to him 3 times. He commended some of us who were his first generals. I told the people who had come with me that they were free to go home now, but since the long wall was so close, I would go see it. They would come along if they liked. So, loath to disband after such high adventures, we reached the northern boundary of the world, chasing Mongols en route. I touched the long wall with my own fingers, running the edge of my hands between the stones, tracing the grooves the builder's hands had made. We lay our foreheads and our cheeks against the long wall and cried like the women who had come here looking for their men so long building the wall. In my travels north, I had not found my brother. Carrying the news of the new emperor, I went home, where one more battle awaited me. The baron, who had drafted my brother, would still be bearing sway over our village. Having dropped my soldiers off at the crossroad and bridges, I attacked the baron's stronghold alone. I jumped over the double walls and landed with swords drawn and knees bent, ready to spring. When no one accosted me, I sheathed the swords and walked about like a guest until I found the baron. He was counting his money, his fat ringed fingers playing over the abacus. Who are you? What do you want? He said, encircling his profits with his arms. He sat square and fat like a god. I want your life in payment for your crimes against the villagers. I haven't done anything to you. All this is mine. I earned it. I didn't steal it from you. I've never seen you before in my life. Who are you? I am a female avenger. Then, heaven help him, he tried to be charming, to appeal to me man to man. Oh, come now, everyone takes the girls when he can. The families are glad to be rid of them. Girls are maggots in the rice. It's more profitable to raise geese than daughters. He quoted to me the sayings I hated. Regret what you've done before I kill you, I said. I haven't done anything other men even you wouldn't have done in my place. You took away my brother. I free apprentices. He was not an apprentice. China needs more soldiers in wartime. You took away my childhood. I don't know what you're talking about. We've never met before. I've done nothing to you. You've done this, I said, and ripped off my shirt to show him my back. You are responsible for this. And when I saw his startled eyes at my breasts, I slashed him across the face, and on the second stroke, cut off his head. I pulled my shirt back on and opened the house to the villagers. The baron's family and servants hid in closets and under beds. The villagers dragged them out into the courtyard when they tried them next to the beheading machine. Did you take my harvest so that my children had to eat grass? A weeping father asked. I saw him steal grain, another testified. My family was hiding under the thatch on the roof when the bandits robbed our house, and we saw this one take off his mask. They spared those who proved they could be reformed. They beheaded the others. Their necks were collared in the beheading machine, which slowly clamped shut. There was one last-minute reprieve of a bodyguard when a witness shouted testimony just as the vice was pinching blood. The guard had but recently joined the household in exchange for a child hostage. A slow killing gives a criminal time to regret his crimes and think of the right words to prove he can change.